Okay, so before we get into looking at Nexus Uni or how to do the research, I think a really important preliminary point is what is a judicial opinion? I think that can be a confusing idea, and people without legal backgrounds can confuse what that might be. I know that it took a long time before I really understood what a judicial opinion was. I hate to admit it, but I was already like past my first year of law school before I really understood what it was that we were reading and what they were all about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I have some resources that I think will help clarify what it is that we're talking about here. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. And let me hide my floating panel so I'm able to show you what I'm looking at. So right here, this is a document that shows us the structure of the federal court system. So in the federal court system, you've got the States Supreme Court, which everybody knows about. Under that, you have the Court of Appeals. And then you have the US district courts. The district courts are really what are called trial courts. And then after the trial courts, you have the appeals court and the US Supreme Court. States are similar. Let me show you California here. Here's California. In California, you can see that you've got superior trial courts, then you have a court of appeals, and then you have a Supreme Court. Not all states will have this intermediate court of appeals. Some states that maybe are smaller, they only have a Supreme Court or what they call a court of last resort. In fact, not all of them even call them Supreme Courts. But you'll know that the first court that people go to is the trial court. And then if they have to appeal the decision, it goes up to either the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, whichever is the next level of court within their jurisdiction. Now, the reason that I'm talking about this is, and looking at these different levels of the court, is it's really important for you to understand that when we're reading judicial opinions, what we are reading are the opinions of either the appellate court or the Supreme Court. We are not reading the opinions of the district courts or the superior trial courts. Now, this can get kind of confusing because sometimes you will see opinions of trial courts out there, or you will see opinions of the district courts. But it's really important to understand the difference and what a trial court is as opposed to an appeal court. So, two companies get really angry at each other about something, and they decide that they're upset enough about whatever the dispute is that they need a court to intervene and help them. Well, in that case, what they're going to do is they're going to start at in the federal system, a district court, in the state system, the superior trial court. And they're going to go to that trial court and they're going to ask the court to settle their dispute for them. Sometimes it's with the jury, sometimes it's with the judge, but either way, they're asking for the court to settle that dispute between them. And what the superior trial court is doing is settling a dispute between two people or two entities, or maybe multiple entities. But whatever that trial court decides or that district court in the federal system decides, it's only as applied to the parties of that case. They're not making any law by that decision, and it's really just a decision to those parties, okay? And so for that reason, the orders or decisions of trial courts or district courts don't really have any kind of legal precedent that they're setting. They're not making any law. They're just resolving the dispute between those two parties. Now, once the trial court is done, if one of the parties doesn't like the outcome, and they don't like the outcome because they feel like the judge in the trial court got it wrong, they got the law wrong, or there was something that was decided that was an error, they might have a right to appeal. And that's when the case goes up to the next level of court, either an appellate court if there's an intermediary court like that, or to the Supreme Court if in that state there is no intermediary. So in that case, they would appeal and they would have some reason to appeal. And when they're appealing and they're saying, hey, the law was incorrectly applied, or there was some error in the way that the trial court did things, and we need the appellate court to change that decision. Well, the appellate court's decision is not going to only apply to the trial court. The appellate court decision or the Supreme Court decision is going to apply to the entire jurisdiction that that court oversees. And the reason for that is that it's not really settling the dispute between the parties. It's settling the dispute of whether the trial court is applying the law correctly, or there was some other kind of harmful error, which is directly tied to the way that we administer the laws within that jurisdiction or within the country. So that means that when the appellate court makes their decision, it becomes a judicial opinion. And that is what we are reading. We are reading a judicial opinion that applies to that entire jurisdiction, not just to the parties. And that's why it's important and why it makes the law. Now, it can get a little bit more complicated than that. You may have heard about published opinions and unpublished opinions, what all of that means. I could teach a semester long class about how those opinions come into being, the voting system within the courts, who writes the opinions. We won't get into all of that today. What's really important for you to understand is judicial opinions are the decisions of either the appellate court or the Supreme Court within a jurisdiction. And those opinions form the law for that jurisdiction. So in California, if it was a Supreme Court decision, it would apply to the entire state of California. If it was a Court of Appeals opinion, it would apply to those areas within the jurisdiction of that Court of Appeal. But if it's a decision by a trial court, the Superior Court of California, and notice I'm not saying an opinion, just a decision, then that is not something that is a judicial opinion. It's not what you're looking for. And I'll make that distinction when we go through the research, and I'll show you how to avoid looking at those cases. So anyhow, just want to make sure we understand that. That way we're all on the same page about that topic. I'm going to go ahead and pause my recording and stop the share.